Good afternoon, dear Jens, dear Boris, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad to welcome you in Lithuania at the Lithuanian German Exercise Griffin Storm. It is of a significant importance for Lithuania to have our allies by our side, especially in the current security context in the region. We are at the front line of the alliance. Our border is a NATO border. Russia is executing its bloody war operations just at our doors. Recent events in Russia exposing instability of Kremlin regime and having the Wagner Group on the ground in Belarus could have additional security implications on Lithuania and the entire region. This is why the presence of our allies and the commitment to collective defense are so important to Lithuania. The alliance is as strong as its most exposed spots are, and NATO's eastern flank is exactly that spot. Last year in Madrid, the allies made decisions towards strengthening the eastern NATO flank. I am glad to see these decisions already being implemented here in Lithuania by the permanent presence of the German Forward Command element and regular exercises of German brigade units in our country. Let me emphasize that the deployment of the German brigade in Lithuania is a national security priority for Lithuania. We have allocated significant funds building infrastructure and working on creating excellent training conditions on the ground. Boots on the ground is our absolute priority, and as a host nation we will do our part to provide all the necessary support. Lithuania takes its security and its commitment as a member of NATO very seriously. We are already allocating 2.5% of our GDP to defense spending, with additional opportunities to spend more as a host nation to welcome additional NATO forces. We invest in the infrastructure of military mobility and military ranges, and work to empower our defense industry to be able to contribute to our national and shared NATO needs. We are most thankful to our German colleagues for their long-term commitment to Lithuania's security, the security of the entire region, and their demonstrated leadership in this domain. However, it's important to not stop where we are and continue working on boosting our deterrence and defense. The summit in Vilnius, taking place in a couple of weeks, will be the right moment for that. We need strengthened regional security and military preparedness. Approving regional defense plans is of great importance. I'm glad that we are already able to reach an agreement on NATO's rotational air defense model in the Baltic countries. It is a significant milestone in strengthening our security. We should continue moving in this direction in unity and with resolve. Dear Jens, dear Boris, thank you once again for being here today, and thank you for your commitment to our collective security. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I invite the Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, to take the floor.
Dear Gitanas, dear Boris, it's good to be together with both of you here today and to watch this exercise, which is so important for the whole alliance. And it's also great to be together with you just 2 weeks from the Vilnius Summit, the NATO Summit here in Lithuania. We just had the opportunity to meet some of the Lithuanian and the German troops participating in Exercise Griffin Storm, and I thank them for their impressive skills and service. Griffin Storm is one of the biggest exercises in the region this year and demonstrates the ability to rapidly scale up the German-led NATO battle group to brigade size. with the German personnel and the military vehicles deployed operating seamlessly alongside the Lithuanian forces. This exercise sends a clear message. NATO is ready to defend every inch of Allied territory. There are now over 40,000 troops under NATO command, primarily in the eastern part of the alliance, backed by significant air and naval power. We are demonstrating that we can also reinforce quickly whenever needed. Further strengthening our deterrence and defense will be high on the agenda at the Vilnius Summit. We are now putting in place new regional plans with specific forces and capabilities assigned to the defense of specific allies. These forces will exercise together regularly. We have also agreed a new rotational model for air and missile defense to allow for swift transition from air policing to air defense. The accession of Finland and Sweden to NATO will further strengthen Baltic security. I spoke yesterday to President Erdogan and I am also in contact with the Swedish and the Finnish government, and we agreed to convene a high-level meeting in Brussels before the summit. This meeting will include foreign ministers, heads of intelligence and national security advisors. The aim is to make progress in completing Sweden's accession to NATO. Support to Ukraine is a top priority for the summit, and I commend both Lithuania and Germany for providing critical support and training which helps save lives every day. At the summit, we will agree a multi-year package of assistance and upgrade our political ties with Ukraine. This will bring Ukraine closer to its rightful place in NATO. At the same time, we continue to monitor the ongoing situation in Russia. The events over the weekend are an internal Russian matter, and one more demonstration of the big strategic mistake that President Putin has made with his illegal war against Ukraine. NATO is also monitoring the situation in Belarus. Allies condemn Russia's announcement about the deployment of nuclear weapons to Belarus. This is reckless and irresponsible. We don't see any indication that Russia is preparing to use nuclear weapons, but NATO remains vigilant. We call on Belarus to stop its support for Russia's illegal war in Ukraine. Moscow is attempting to intimidate us and deter us from supporting Ukraine, but we will not be intimidated. We will continue to stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes, and we will defend all allies against any threat. So, Mr. President, Minister, it's great to be together with you here today, and I look forward to continue to work with you and to welcome you to the Vilnius Summit.
Thank you. I invite the Minister of Defense of Germany, Boris Pistorius, to take the floor.
Thank you very much, President, dear Jens. Ladies and gentlemen, this exercise really was very, very impressive, and the members of the North Atlantic Council quite agree, I think, and I would like to thank them for their visit here. I really appreciate that. The men and women of Armored Infantry Brigade 41 of the Lithuanian Algiras battalion gave a spectacular performance. And the cooperation with our Lithuanian friends works very well, has been working very well during the last almost 7 years. And I'm really very grateful in the name of all my troops for the outstanding hospitality of Lithuania. Thank you very much. Armored Infantry Brigade 41 has shown us that they have got what it takes. This is very important too. 1,000 troops, 350 vehicles deployed to Lithuania at a very short notice, just 24 hours, something like that. This was prepared by the forward command element. In Lithuania, they make a powerful contribution to defend NATO eastern flank. Stand side by side with their allies, ready to defend Lithuania together when it is necessary. Now we are looking towards the NATO Summit, which also will be protecting at short notice with our additional capabilities, which means we will protect the summit with our air defense capabilities. And I expect we will achieve good results that will continue to challenge us. Let me add something which I already mentioned earlier this day. Germany used to be the eastern flank of NATO territory until the end of Warsaw Pact. And we could always rely and always trust in our allies in NATO, who were always willing and able to protect our security and our freedom in Germany as a very exposed country at the eastern flank of NATO at that time. And nowadays, eastern flank is, for example, the Baltics, Poland, Slovakia, and other countries. And Slovakia and Poland and the Baltics are very much exposed in a special way, of course, because of the geographic situation. And Germany, as the biggest economy in Europe and an important member of NATO, of course, is willing and will be able to take responsibility now for the new eastern flank after more than 3 decades. We are willing to contribute our part to protect it. And that means precisely Germany is ready to deploy a robust brigade in Lithuania on a permanent basis, provided that adequate infrastructure, for example, barracks, exercise infrastructure, ammunition depots are given, and that SACEUR, of course, maintains the flexibility needed according NATO planning. This is very crucial too. So therefore, I'm very glad to be here again, and it's certainly not my last time in Lithuania. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I invite the media representatives to pose their questions. Please take a microphone, introduce yourself, and indicate who you are addressing your question to.
Thank you, Kristina. My name is Saulius Jakučionis. I'm from news agency Baltic News Service. I have a question for the German Minister of Defense, Mr. Pistorius. Minister, when Germany will make a decision regarding sending air defense capabilities to Lithuania under this new air defense model, which was agreed in NATO several weeks ago, and also on the other matter, touching upon the press conference previously, where you took place in Vilnius airport, can you indeed confirm that there are Wagner units being stationed to Belarus? Thank you very much. And also, can you confirm that Wagner units are being stationed in Belarus? Thank you. And President Nausėda, I also have a question for you. What are the other countries except Germany? Lithuania is negotiating to send, to deploy air defense capabilities. Thank you.
From my part, I don't have any newer information about the deployment of Wagner troops or units into Belarus.
Okay.
What about air defense? Air defense, when you will make the decision to send units to Lithuania?
Air defense, well, we made our decision for the summit this year, but not more at the moment.
This is the issue I would like to touch too, because air defense systems are critically important, especially in the crisis scenario. Of course, the air policing missions are important during the peacetime, but air defense systems are much more important if the situation starts to deteriorate. And the war in Ukraine showed that really to control the airspaces is one of the most important possibilities to reduce the losses, especially during initial stage of the crisis. But regarding your question, yes, Minister already mentioned that now we are talking about air defense systems provided during the NATO Summit and shortly afterwards. We are talking about air defense systems on a rotational basis after the Vilnius Summit. And I already started my discussions with different allies, namely Netherlands, France, Germany, and other countries, but so far it's very complicated issue to answer this question and who will be responsible for which part or which element of air defense systems. Much more important is that we already have the conclusion or decision on the NATO level that air defense systems in the eastern flank on rotational basis, this is probably adequate response to the current situation, and we are looking forward to cooperate with our partners in the nearest future regarding this issue.
Thank you. We have a second media question, please.
Natalia Droscheck from Bloomberg. Thank you so much for the questions. For Secretary Stoltenberg, what impact does NATO expect the Wagner events to have on the battlefield in Ukraine? And German Minister Pistorius, I was curious to ask, why did Germany change its decision about having permanent troops based in Lithuania? Was this at all tied to the Wagner events over the weekend, or was this in motion already before? Thank you.
I think what we've seen in Russia over the last days demonstrates the fragility of the German regime. And of course it is a demonstration of weakness.
The German regime?
When there are... Sorry?
Not the German regime.
No, sorry, the Russian. sorry.
I'm sorry. They're quite stable at the moment.
Sorry. We see the weakness of the Russian regime, and it also demonstrates how difficult and dangerous it is for President Putin to be reliant on mercenaries. That has actually turned against him. And it also demonstrates that it is hard to predict exactly what will now happen in the next days and weeks. But we should not make the mistakes that we are underestimating the Russians. So we need to continue to provide support to Ukraine. And that's exactly what NATO and NATO allies are doing with military support, but also support for the long term. And that's in a way what we can say today about the effects on the battlefield in Ukraine.
To your question, it is not really a change of our position. What I wanted and what I did emphasize today was to say we are willing to do that under two preconditions. And the one is, of course, the infrastructure which the Lithuanian government is willing and prepared to provide as soon as possible. And we agreed to build up the brigade in the same speed like improving, like building up the infrastructure succeeds in Lithuania. And the second point is very important too, regarding and looking to Jens Stoltenberg. Of course, SACEUR has certain interests and very important interests too. So we said he has to have the possibility to maintain military flexibility at the eastern flank, which is very important too. So if he does not disagree, we will go on and proceed in that way.
From my side, I can only assure you that our part of the job we will do as good as possible and as quick as possible, meaning elements of infrastructure in order to accommodate the brigade size presence of German troops in my country.
Thank you. We have time for one last question, please.
Thank you very much. Michael Fischer, German press agency. I have a question for the Secretary General, first of all. Does NATO need to react in any way on the recent developments in Russia? President Nausėda, for example, suggested yesterday to strengthen the eastern flank of NATO right now if the Wagner troops will settle in Belarus. Is that an option from your point of view, or are there any consequences for the NATO-Russia Founding Act? And my second question to you would be, what message goes out from the permanent deployment of the German brigade that was announced by Minister Pistorius today? What message goes out to Mr. Putin and Mr. Lukashenko from that deployment? And Mr. Nausėda, a question on the brigade too. The condition is that Lithuania builds the infrastructure for the brigade. By when will that be finished?
Let me start by saying that we, of course, very much welcome the German leadership, which has been demonstrated throughout actually a long time, but it's very much enhanced by the German announcement today, because a German-led battle group, but also more German troops deployed here, shows a strong German commitment to our collective defense, to our shared security, and it's part of the adaptation of NATO which has taken place since 2014, with high readiness of forces, but also with more deployments of combat-ready NATO troops in the eastern part of the lines, including the battle groups, and one of them is the German-led battle group here in Lithuania. So this demonstrates German leadership, German commitment to our transatlantic bond, and it also demonstrates the value of a multilateral NATO commitment to a country like Lithuania. It sends, of course, a message, our presence here, and also the exercise we just watched, of NATO readiness and NATO capability to defend every inch of NATO territory. And the reason we do that is, of course, not to provoke a conflict, but it is to prevent the conflict, because credible deterrence is about preventing war, it's about preventing conflict, it's about preventing an attack and preserving peace. And this is not only about forward presence, which is important, but it's also about pre-positioned equipment supplies, high readiness, and exercises. So it's all of this together, backed also by significant air and naval power. And that also fits into the issue of air defense. I think, of course, land-based air defense systems are important, but we have to understand that when we now have this rotational model in place for air defense, which can make it easier for us to switch from air policing to air defense, air forces is also part of air defense, and naval forces can also provide significant air defense capabilities on very short notice. So this is the German announcement is welcomed, and it's part of a pattern, a big adaptation of NATO that have taken place over several years. One more thing about this is that we will also make important decisions at the Vilnius Summit on the new force structure, the new force model, and also with plans that will dedicate specific forces to protect specific territories. This is the first time since actually the Cold War where we are going to have plans linked to specific forces to protect specific territories. Then the first question was on... Yeah, well, so first of all, I think it's a bit early to say exactly, because things may still evolve. Second, we are, of course, monitoring very closely, and we are able to react quickly if there is a need. At the same time, I think it is important to remind you all that this is about internal Russian matters. And therefore what NATO is focused on is to support Ukraine. It demonstrates the fragility of the Russian regime, but it's not for NATO to intervene in those issues. That's a Russian matter. What matters for NATO is to not be intimidated, not be prevented from continue to provide unprecedented support for Ukraine, and also, of course, to have the necessary deterrence and defense. We have that already. We have increased our presence over the years, and with the German announcement, we have yet another example of how allies are increasing their presence. But again, it's not only about presence, it's also about the ability to have early warnings, indications, and then react quickly if there is a need, and this exercise demonstrates exactly that.
We simplify the procedures and technical procedures, legal procedures, in order to be able to finalize the building of infrastructure by 2026, but I will be not angry if the Minister of Defense, which is sitting in front of me, will finalize in 2025. Anyway, we have a strong political commitment in Lithuania to find out the necessary financial resources in order to be able to finance the needs of infrastructure, but of course, hand in hand, modernization of our armed forces, it's a very important priority to us too.
Thank you. The press conference is over. I wish everyone a pleasant afternoon.